So this passage has loads going on in it that I didn't see to begin with. And we could be here all day, but I knew it was going to be a long service, so I wanted to write a short sermon. We'll find out if I succeeded or not. But I also wanted something that grounded this passage in our lives. You know, we're going to read through this whole book of Acts over the course of the next, I don't know how long, quite a while. Don't worry, we're not doing it all. We're going to break it up with things. We're not going to be, but it's going to take us a while to get through it. And there's so much life in it for us, so much life. But sometimes it can feel really distant, right? It's 2,000 years ago. It's 2,000 miles away in a place that most of us haven't been, though, as we said before, if you have visited some of the places in Acts, we're interested to hear from you so you can help us bring them to life as we go along. So how does it actually bed down in our lives here in 21st century Portobello in Scotland in this moment with the stuff going on in our lives in the middle of a pandemic? What on earth might this have to say to us? And I think today this passage really does have something to say to us. And what I want us to remember is that actually Luke is intentionally organizing his material this week because he wants to set us up for what's coming next. Okay, so next week is Pentecost. It's not Pentecost in the church calendar, but it is in the book of Acts. That's the next thing that comes. And you have to remember that the apostles and the group of people, they don't know. They don't know that this is about to happen. They don't know that Pentecost is about to happen. They've been told they're going to be baptized with the Spirit, so they've got some hope of something happening. But they've got no idea what it is, how revolutionary it is. They're just waiting. They don't really know what's going on. We're kind of cheating. We know what's going to happen next. And so our joy is in looking at them and what they see there. So Luke organizes this material. They've walked back into Jerusalem. And then we're told who was there. And we get this list. And one of the subtitles for our sermon series is that this book is about a very ordinary group of people being used for extraordinary purposes. Who are these ordinary people? Peter, just a fisherman. John, another fisherman. James, yeah, he was a fisherman. Andrew, yep, he was a fisherman too. Philip, he was a fisherman. Thomas, anyone want to guess? No, he wasn't a fisherman. We don't actually know what Thomas did. We know very little about him. Bartholomew was a scholar of the law. Matthew was a tax collector. James, the son of Alphaeus, do you know all we know about him is that he was Matthew's brother? Imagine being known for eternity and the only thing we know about you is, oh, you were somebody's brother. Bit disappointing. I bet there's some people in here go, oh, I know what that feels like. Yeah? Simon the Zealot. He was a fisherman. And he was a Jewish nationalist. Staunch nationalist. That's where the zealot comes from. Likely borderline terrorist. Certainly a hater of tax collectors. And then Judas, who is the most unfortunately named of them because we need to keep saying, not that Judas, the other Judas. We don't know a lot about him either, other than he was a fisherman too. And just in case you think fishermen were some sort of highfalutin part of society, no, absolutely not. They were looked down upon. They were uneducated typically, especially those from the Galilee region. Very, very ordinary group of 11 men. Absolutely nothing fancy about them whatsoever at all. Now, they're not there on their own. There are the women, so we can assume there was some wisdom among them. We see Mary here. And there's a whole other sermon that has the fact that Mary appears at the beginning of Luke's gospel, obviously, when the Spirit comes upon her and she's impregnated with Jesus. And then she appears here at the beginning of Acts. She doesn't appear anywhere else in the book of Acts, just in this one little bit here. And so Luke's doing something there, reminding us of the significance of Mary to the story. And us evangelicals, we can be a bit nervous about that sometimes. But you know what? Mary's really significant to the story. And she's honored among women. We're told that in Luke's gospel. And so we need to be careful we don't throw it out. But the thing that struck me this week is not only are they utterly ordinary with this extraordinary woman there, but also there's 120 of them, we're told. Now, that's not a lot of people. I think we have 56 people in the building today, according to the little list downstairs. 56 people, so double what we have in the building today. Double. That was it, right? That wasn't a church among lots. This is it. This is all there is. Beginning of Acts, this is all that's left of Jesus' 3 years of ministry. 120 people. Do you ever look around and go, man, the church in Scotland's so small now. How will we ever see God in charge of everything in our nation again? How will we ever see it? And arguably, did we ever? But that's a whole other conversation. Do you ever, is it just me that feels like that? Does anyone else ever feel a bit down about that? Well, here's the thing to remind us of. There are tens of thousands of Christians in Scotland today. 120 in the whole world at this point. There's a guy called Tom Holland, who is a historian, very smart man, not a Christian, who has written a book called Dominion. It's about the rise of the Western mind. That's the subtitle. The idea is he wants to explain why the West is like it is. Why is it that the West is the kind of place it is? Because it's completely different from anywhere else in the world. How did it form? And this book really looks at, and his ultimate answer is it's because Christianity formed the West, and he sees that in the end as largely a positive thing. I want to read you a bit from that book, and I want you to remember where we are in our story. We've got 120 people, that's it, 120 people, very ordinary people, not powerful men and women. This is not the head of Israel. We've not got the Herod's not on board. We've not got powerful soldiers, anything like that. What we have is 120 very ordinary folk. And Tom Holland writes this. It's the audacity of it. The audacity of finding in a twisted and defeated corpse the glory of the creator of the universe that serves to explain more surely than anything else the sheer strangeness of Christianity and of the civilization to which it gave birth. You hear that? The sheer strangeness of Christianity is because we see the glory of God in a cross. That's the strangeness of it. And he says this, today, the power of this strangeness remains as alive as it has ever been. It is manifest in the great surge of conversions that has swept Africa and Asia over the past century, in the convictions of millions upon millions that the breath of the Spirit like a living fire still blows upon the world, and in Europe and in North America, in the assumptions of many more millions who would never think to describe themselves as Christian. All are heirs to the same revolution, a revolution that has at its molten heart the image of a God dead on a cross. It transformed the world, and there were 120 very ordinary people. That, my friends, is good news, because it means it has roughly nothing to do with us and everything to do with this extraordinary God who's at work. So let's go back to our story. Our story then takes a diversion, and Peter talks about Judas, and there's something really interesting there, because Peter talks almost grievingly about how not only Judas's betrayal, but the fact that he was among them and he was a friend of theirs. In the interests of trying to stick to having a short sermon today, we're not going to talk about that. But I'd be delighted to chat with you afterwards if you have any questions. What I want to go on to is the fact that they were so committed to replacing Judas. And they work with what they know, okay? This is the point. Very ordinary people working out their faith in a very ordinary way is what we see here. They see that they're down a man, right? But this isn't a sport. It's not like there's substitution rules. There's no requirement. Jesus didn't say, make sure there's always 12 of you. But they decided they would have 12. And there was a reason for that. And the reason was that at that time in Jewish history, every Jewish movement understood that if they were going to be the renewal group of Israel, which is what the church at this point thought they were, it's what the Qumran community thought they were, they all had 12 people at the head of them because they represented the 12 tribes of Israel. And so, given what they knew, which was this is the way that things get done, we need a replacement. And so I thought, oh, they've made a mistake. But I don't think they did. I think they're working out their faith with the knowledge that they have. And friends, isn't that all we're trying to do every day? Sometimes I think we think that we need to know everything before we do anything. But actually, the invitation of God is that we must go with what we know right now. Go with what you have. As Andy Bevan said to us, a year or so ago, go with what's in your hand. So they see the 12 as significant, and they want to replace that. It's really interesting to me that in Acts chapter 12, where James is martyred, he's the first of the apostles to be martyred, they don't replace him after that. So something changes after Pentecost, and we'll come to that in a moment. So first of all, they replace the 12. And then they choose. So they pick 2 men from among them. They make up some rules. They say, well, it must have been this and it must have been that. So the rules are there must be a male. Oops. There must be... They must have been with Jesus from John the Baptist through, and they must be a witness to the resurrection. So they look about and they go, yeah. And I do wonder if there was a bit of, we don't want him. No. Like, he'll be a nightmare. He'd be even louder than Peter. But they have this conversation. They choose. They use the wisdom that God has given them. And friends, we're often invited to do that too. Yes, we want to hear from God, and I will always be encouraging you to do that. But sometimes God just calls us to walk out our faith and make decisions, to choose to do the things that God has put in front of us. That's not a lack of faith. It's actually putting one foot in front of the other. I've seen too many people who sit there going, well, I'm waiting for a word from the Lord before I do anything. Now, so caveat, sometimes God says wait, and if he does, you must wait. That's exactly why they're sitting in Jerusalem right now. So that's number one. But in the absence of that very specific call to wait, the idea that when things come along that you could do or participate in and you don't, I don't understand that, friends. That's not at all the faith that we've got. The faith that we've got is to choose to get involved with what is there. We can choose good things. Does that make sense? And that's exactly what they do here. They use their wisdom. And then they pray. So good. Well done. Because that's really important. We ought not to be making decisions without praying. This is at the very core of what we do. And then they cast lots. What do you do with that? They're like, okay, we've chosen, we've used our wisdom, we're living out the kind of thing we think God's about, we've prayed, and now we'll just chuck some things on the ground and see what happens. Like, I don't know about you, but that just blows my mind. So I did a bunch of reading this week. I was trying, there has to be a bigger story here, right? And there are maybe a few. But I think the reality is this is how they made decisions at this point in their culture. And they had done throughout the life of the people of God. A couple of quick examples. Proverbs 16:33 suggests that God is in control of the way that the lots are cast and the way they come up. No random chance, says Proverbs 16:33. The problem with Proverbs is you can prove just about anything from Proverbs. So we need some more backing than just that. However, David, he selected the high priest by this way. That was what they did. And right up until this time in Jewish history, they were still using lots to allocate priestly duties. How do we know that? Because when Luke starts his gospel, right at the beginning of Luke 1, Zechariah is chosen to go into the Holy of Holies by the casting of lots. Luke's doing something else here, casting back to his last story. But anyway, and so lots were used to choose people for important tasks. Oh, that's exactly what they're doing here. They're choosing someone for an important task, perhaps even a priestly task. Now, I'm not expecting you to go home and start throwing dice on the floor to decide whether, which color of socks you're wearing tomorrow or what, I don't think we should be doing that now. And interestingly, it never appears again in the Bible because I think Pentecost changes everything. But they had a way of doing things. They stuck to it and they did it filled with faith. But God is about to unleash next week, or you could go and read it this afternoon, in Acts chapter 2. He's about to unleash a whole new way. The old ways are about to be done away with. And there is a whole new way of doing things about to come about. And they'll change everything. I mean, even as simple as the qualifications they used to choose an apostle. So they said, male. Well, first of all, we're about to find out that the Spirit's going to come on all flesh. That's what we'll see next week. And then he says it has to be somebody who is with Jesus. But the thing we see at Pentecost is that it's people from all parts of the known world that end up being the people who are sent out. So it's not people who are with Jesus at all. And then they have to be witnesses to the resurrection. Well, we discover very quickly that that's not the case at all. Things are going to get turned upside down. And the choice that they will be faced with is, will they go back to their old ways, or will they trust this new way and what God is doing? That for us is also the challenge. As much as I want to encourage us to have one foot in front of the other, to have faith that what we know now is enough to get us through, that God has revealed enough to us, that God has filled us enough with His Spirit, God has taught us enough for us to take a risk in going for Him, we also are supposed to be changing. Paul says in Romans 12, do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. You see, friends, we're supposed to be transformed. We're supposed to be transformed. And I don't know about you, but I wonder if in this last 18 months, I haven't been pursuing being transformed as much as I might have been. I've been kind of stuck a little bit. I've been surviving. And that's exactly the situation these guys find themselves in. They're surviving. They're hopeful for something else. But the challenge I find myself with, and I wonder if it's your challenge too, is, are you ready to put yourself in a posture where Jesus is about to do a new thing in you? You're not too old for Jesus to do a new thing in you. You're not too mature a Christian for Jesus to do a new thing in you. You're not in a position at all with your circumstances that Jesus can't do a new thing in you. He wants to do new things in us. He wants to transform us and to renew us. So what happens to this very, very ordinary group of people? This small group of 120, and in particular these 11 that we have. They all bar one give their lives in martyrdom. Peter is martyred in Rome, crucified upside down. John, he's the one who lives. He was exiled to Patmos, lived his life in obscurity there, or not so much. James, he was the very first martyr in Acts chapter 12, speared by Herod. Andrew, he's martyred most likely in Russia. He was also crucified. Philip was martyred in Asia Minor. Thomas was speared to death in India. Bartholomew was also martyred in India, also likely around the time of Thomas. Matthew was martyred in Ethiopia. James, the son of Alphaeus, was clubbed to death in Syria. Simon the Zealot, he was in Persia, and he was martyred for refusing to worship the sun god. And Judas, the son of James, was martyred in Syria, most likely along with James, the son of Alphaeus. We don't know all of those for 100% sure, but the best evidence says that's true. Why do I tell you that rather depressing news? Well, because it tells us that the reasons they lived was for a good news story that they knew to be true. A Jesus who rose from the dead, so true that they were willing to give their lives for it. Because let me tell you, friends, if it was a hoax, there's a point at which they go, tell you what, we were just kidding. We made it all up. We didn't really see Jesus after he rose from the dead. We made it all up. We weren't really filled with the Holy Spirit. We made it all up. We didn't really do all these miracles. Please don't kill me. No, they didn't do any of that because they knew it was true. And these very ordinary people lived very extraordinary lives because they had encountered the truth of a God disfigured on a cross and raised to life. That changes everything, friends. Yes, we walk with faith that we have right now, but that reality, the truth of that story in us, will cause us and enable us to do extraordinary things, to bring glory to the God who has already done the most extraordinary thing in coming in his Son. So I want to pray for us this morning that God would use us, that we would be willing to be used, that the good news of Jesus might be so compelling to us that we would go to all these places in the world that we hear the apostles going to. And most of all, I'm going to pray that we would realize that it starts with the simple actions of what we know right now. Today, when we leave this place, when we're sitting having coffee, we can minister to one another. All these things. Let me pray.